Hello, everyone. This is Fang from Baidu Ventures, and I'm going to be talking to you today about a topic called conscious networking. This term I basically coined about a month ago because I kept on getting people asking me questions about how I network, how I'm able to connect so many people to each other, and how I'm able to just sort of be the one person on their LinkedIn network that is connected to whoever they're looking to reach out to. And because this skill set is so important, and yet it's not taught in schools, and I don't think it's really widely understood. I really want to share with the world what I consider to be networking. It's actually not what I would consider a word that I would ever really use to describe what I call really connecting with people. Um, but it's a word that we have to use because everybody understands what it is. And in this presentation, I'm going to explain what my definition of networking is and how it's been really helpful to me and how it could be beneficial to you as well. I'm going to address a lot of very commonly asked questions and talk about, why you do not need a lot of spreadsheets or to periodically stay in touch with a huge number of casual contacts in order to be top of mind. How you go from creating a, a strong professional relationship and maybe moving that into a strong friendship as well, and how to even say, like, politely say no to requests for your time, which I'm sure everybody gets a lot of without hurting people's feelings. And so these are some of the topics that I will be addressing in the next couple of slides in this 30-minute presentation, and hopefully it'll be helpful to you. Here are all the content areas that we're going to be going through in this presentation. I'm going to give a brief introduction about myself, talk about why connecting is important and the benefits that I've gotten from this skill set, talk about why it's a learnable skill set. And there's a lot of mythologies around what you have to be in order to be a good networker, and I don't agree with any of them. And also talk about the mindset and what my definition of networking is, and specifically go into how that's influenced my approach to connecting with people. Go through a case study and talk in a little bit more detail as well as to how to handle weak connections and really leverage that to your benefit. And since we are all now networking during COVID, I'm going to give some really good screenshot examples of good cold outreach LinkedIn requests that have caught my attention and why they're so good. And lastly, I'm going to provide my contact information for anyone who wants to continue to stay in touch. So, who am I? I'm a director of investments at Baidu Ventures, and I have worked across 10 countries, picked up Portuguese on a project in Brazil, and have spent most of my career in the financial services and technology sector. And at heart, I'm a connector. I have loved connecting people to each other for many, many years, and I'm really excited to be able to share this skill set with you all. So how did this all get started? Well, I posted about conscious networking on LinkedIn about a month ago because people kept on asking me about tips on, how do I actually network? And that's how this, I got invited to talk about this topic here, and that's just to provide a background for this presentation. So why is connecting important? If you are a founder, you very much know the power of a warm intro to a venture capitalist, because it really lends you credibility. This is also true if you want to connect with potential enterprise customers, for example, because otherwise everyone is so busy that they're not going to give you, potentially the time of day unless you're coming from a reputable source or able to sort of connect with them through a cold outreach email that really shows that you can also add some sort of value to their life in order for them to respond to you. And knowing how to do that is really critical. Not to mention that if you ever do wish to seek a job, most jobs are not published publicly, and 80% are filled through personal and professional connections. I also just want to quickly mention that connecting is also something that's very hardwired into us as humans. And what they have found through a 75-year longitudinal study at Harvard that ended in 2014 is that the key finding is that good relationships keep us happier and healthier, period. And so since we spend so much time in our professional lives, we spend more time at work than we do with our families, with our partners, with our friends, it's really important to figure out a way to help you connect with people on a professional level as well, and maybe bring some of those into your personal life as friendships. So what are the benefits from having the skill set? On the personal level, for myself, in my 4 years of investing, I have really never had to look outside my network for doing due diligence or startups. And if I have ever had to go out of my own network, I've never not been able to reach the right person through a cold LinkedIn email or something of that sort. And on top of that, for my portfolio companies, it's been rare when I have not been able to get them in touch with a profession with a business development opportunity, because I have such a wide variety of different types of people in my network that it's pretty easy for me to reach out to the right group of people. And the third benefit, I think, is it really creates optionality opportunities, whether it's directly in your career. So, for example, getting to my first VC deal was extremely difficult. They had gotten to the New York Times and raised a $7 million seed even before I became an investor. So I was able to sort of convince them to open up the round again for me to invest. And I do think that's a lot due to this skill set. Or, for example, in adjacent areas, such as becoming invited to become an advisor to Silicon Valley, the TV show, without asking for it. And that's a case study that I'm actually going to go through in a little bit in detail. I also want to emphasize that this is definitely a learnable skill set. You do not have to be born with this. I was definitely not born charismatic or confident. It is something that I really picked up probably when I entered high school because I wanted to learn how to be charismatic, how to be likable, how to have a lot of friends, stuff that I didn't necessarily grow up with. It was not necessarily, uh, it did not always come naturally to me. Myth number two is you really don't have to be an extrovert. A lot of people think you have to be super extroverted and know a ton of people in order to be a good networker. You really don't. I'm by nature probably half extrovert, half introvert, going more into introvert now. So again, you really don't need to be an extrovert to be good at this. Myth number three, you don't have to be the kindest, nicest person in the world in order to be good at this either. I am certainly not the most patient nor the most kind in any of my social circle friends, or professional contacts. So you don't have to be goody goody. And you also don't have to be a yes person. I say no all the time. And actually, that's something I quite recommend, which is saying no quickly and often. And I think that actually is real benefit as well to the skill set. So you don't have to say yes to every single request that comes your way because you will be overwhelmed if so. And the last one is you really don't have to be polished. I think being authentic makes for a much deeper and truer connection, and people really do appreciate that. So you don't have to be that, slick hair backed, in a business suit, handing out business cards type of networker. That does not work for everybody. And before we get started, I just want to say, don't take my word for it. Experiment in the laboratory of your life and see what you find. Take what's useful and really discard the rest. And we're all going to mess up as we practice the skill. And that's why it's a skill, because you have to keep on practicing to be good at it. So forgive yourself if you mess up. Don't beat yourself up and just, charge on. I want you to ask yourself before we really get started, which is what comes to mind when you think of networking, and really be honest with yourself. I ask this question because how you think about networking is really going to impact your approach. I have friends who think of networking as something that's very sleazy, very dirty, and they probably are not going to be very good at it because they've already written it off as something that's not really worthy of their attention, that they don't think is a good thing, right? And so you're not going to really spend much time working on something that you don't really think is a good thing already if you've made that judgment ahead of time. There are people who think of networking as getting something from the other person and only reaching out to them when you want something from them. Um, Again, there's no right or wrong in any of these definitions, but the reason why I say this ahead of time is because try to find a definition of networking that really works well for you and that makes you excited to connect with the other person. Because if you have a lot of these preconceived ideas about what networking is or is not, it's going to really impact your approach. And so always keep in mind, ask yourself, like, what am I thinking about when I think about networking? And is this really impacting the results that I'm trying to get? I'm going to tell you what's worked well for me. And this is my understanding of what networking is. One, it's connecting with a person and not the role. Two, it's creating mutually beneficial long-term relationships. And three, it's really being grateful for the relationship without any expectations. And I'm going to go into each one of these on a theoretical level and then give some practical tips as well as to how to use this approach. For person versus role, On a practical level, I mean, roles change all the time, right? And somebody might come into your life, maybe in a professional context where they're not that helpful to you or they can't be that helpful to you. And maybe someday that will change, right? The important thing, really, though, is I would say bullet points 2 and 3, which is really trying to engage with them on a personal level, because not only are you going to have a much more enjoyable and fun conversation that way, that type of conversation is also going to make you much more memorable. One of the questions I get all the time from people is, how do you keep track of all these connections, right? I've got probably over 9,000 connections on LinkedIn, about almost 5,000 on Facebook. How do you keep track of all these people that you know? Do you keep a spreadsheet? Do you reach out to them periodically? How frequently do you reach out? And actually, I think, well, first of all, the answer is I don't. And by the way, like, this is the context is that this is for casual professional relationships, right? I'm not talking about friendships here. But the reason I don't is because I think people spend so much time on the follow up when in reality, if they just put 95% of the effort on the initial set of exchanges, they don't need all that follow up. Because why are people following up periodically? It's because they want to be top of mind. They're afraid that the other person has forgotten about them, right? But if you have created a good set of first initial impressions on somebody, you don't need all that follow up because they're going to remember you. And that's because if you think about how many conferences you go to, how many people you meet, most people are not that memorable. But the few people you have a truly engaging, fun, memorable conversation with, that's what sticks with people over the long run. And so, in your own experience, if somebody who you had a great conversation with at a conference a couple years ago reaches back out to you for like a small favor or just to re-engage, wouldn't you welcome them coming back into your life? That's been my experience thus far, which is that I don't need to keep on following up with people, and I don't keep any spreadsheets to periodically ping people because I don't have to. I send people relevant information if they come to mind and I think, oh, this is something that would be really interesting to them, or this is a person that might really benefit from being X, Y, and Z. And I do admit I have a good memory, so that does help. So you can definitely keep a spreadsheet if that's helpful to you. But I don't do it in any systematic way because I don't have to. Because whenever I reach out to somebody, assuming that I had a really great couple of interactions a couple of years ago, they will remember who I am, and they will be generally happy to help out. And so it's really the quality of the first couple of interactions that's really important. And they've done studies, I think, that show that you need 8 to 9 other interactions after the first one to remove um, what the first impression told you about the person. And I may be a little bit off on the numbers here, but the first impression definitely counts for a lot. So if you make a good quality first set of impressions, and you're able to do this across a wide variety of different groups of people, at a certain point, you'll realize that you're only 2 or 3 degree connections away from almost everybody you really need to get in touch with. And you have to do this, of course, in a genuine way, but I don't focus so much on the follow-up. I focus on the first set of interactions. So a question might arise, which is how to be memorable in a conversation. One technique that is really easy, especially if you're shy or just starting out, but I think it's helpful for everybody across the board, is really mirroring. And what mirroring actually is just repeating back the last couple words or topic area that the person is talking to you about. So, as an example, if I were with you at a conference and I said to you, "Oh, this presentation is so interesting because it really reminds me of my own college senior thesis paper," you might say back to me, mirroring, and repeat, college senior thesis paper. You just have to sort of convert that last couple words or topic area into a question. And by doing that, the other person automatically will give you more information about that specific topic area. So taking this example again, I might say, yes, and by the way, this is a true story. I wrote my senior thesis college paper about interethnic interactions in Chinese supermarkets in Buenos Aires, Argentina, among the Chinese supermarket owners, among their Argentine clients, among their Paraguayan, Bolivian, Uruguayan workers, etc. And then you might also mirror back and say among their workers, or, there's so many other topic areas you can go into from that. You might ask me about how long were you in Argentina for? Was it difficult to do the research given the number of cultural and language barriers? What was the most interesting part about the study? What were your most interesting learnings, etc., right? I mean, basically, the more you're able to sort of do that in the beginning, the more topic areas and questions might arise. And then you can sort of follow your curiosity and also see what makes the other person excited about this topic area. and try to go down a route where it's exciting for you, and it's also exciting for the other person to talk about. Most people love talking about themselves. You just have to really find out what is the area that they want to be talking about that's also interesting for you as well, to make it into a really good conversation. And I think a lot of people sometimes get nervous and try to think about what is the next best question I can ask them. And instead of listening closely to what the person is saying, which really hinders actually the question asking process. And if you run out of questions or something becomes, if you run out of questions, that's also okay. You can also just comment about how their words impacted you. In this specific case, you might say something like, oh, that's really interesting because I wouldn't have expected the research to show X, Y, and Z. From my own experience coming from immigrant family, like your story really resonated with me because of X, Y, and Z. Another part is to create mutually beneficial relationships. I think this comes down to being a smart giver, and I will go into details on what I mean by that in the next slide. And also, being known as a giver over time, it provides a really good opportunity to generate good karma. After a while, if you are a genuine giver and the community recognizes you as such, other people are much more willing to give to you because they see that you've also always been so helpful to other people, right? And so it naturally creates a virtuous cycle of good karma for everybody around. The other thing about creating mutually beneficial relationships that's helpful is you then become the hub of many centers, and you're always welcome everywhere because you've been the bridge between many different groups of people. And how to create beneficial relationships for everybody is being really thoughtful about connecting people to each other where both sides benefit. There are certain people in my network that everybody wants to maybe connect with, and I try not to wear out my welcome by connecting them to people that are also not beneficial to them. So I think really clearly about, is this connection going to be helpful to both sides? And if so, I will always ask for double opting and try to make that connection that way. Otherwise, I don't flood people with requests that are not necessarily going to be welcome to them. So, tips on how to be a smart giver. Um, when you first meet somebody, and this is something I do quite naturally, and I think it is a practice, I often think about, in a relevant context, not everybody new that I meet, about who in my network could really benefit from meeting this person. And that can also benefit this person by meeting somebody in my network. And so, again, I think about areas where both people can benefit, and I really try to make that connection for both of them. I also try to, find and reward other givers. What I find is that over time, by being a giver, I naturally trigger other givers into also being giving with me. And that's how I actually move from professional to personal relationships pretty quickly, which is a question that also comes up quite a bit, which is, how do you go from professional to personal? It's a natural organic process because when I meet another giver, we get into this virtuous cycle of giving each other, help and support, and eventually it turns into friendship because you build up a trust and respect that is actually necessary in any friendship. And with givers, it comes much more quickly because you quickly identify who those people are. And I will also say that you really should identify them by their actions and not by their words. Somebody may say all these great things, but look to see what their actions are. Have they actually been helpful? Because words can only get you so far, right? And what's great about this method is that not only is it a natural way of making new friends, it also means that everybody in my close network is a giver because that's how I've been able to filter them through. Another question is, how do you say no to people, especially people who might be more on the taker side? Because your giving is also going to trigger people who really want to get more and more things from you. I try to be polite in saying no. I give a good reason for the no, and being busy is a very good reason because you have every right to say no to anybody that you want. I have no hesitations about it, and I try to be helpful in saying no. By maybe giving them a couple of suggestions for other things or other people they can reach out to, etc. I don't always do this. It kind of depends on how much I want to stay in touch with a person. But I think, as a giver, you should have no hesitations about saying no to people who are only going to take up your time and not going to be people you're going to be building long-term relationships with, and do it in a way where you don't burn the bridge. And the third component of my definition of connecting is to be grateful. I am grateful for any relationship that comes my way, especially try to keep it a long-term relationship, and especially with givers. I keep my word on everything. If I say I'm going to do something, I always do it. And that builds up a reputation of reliability and trust. And when I give, I don't expect to get something back every single time I give. If that is the case, it is going to lead to a lot of suffering and disappointment because that's just not the way that the world works. My belief is that karma is real and that karma oftentimes comes back in very unexpected ways. And the last part I would say is if you're asking for a favor, don't feel entitled to a yes. Whenever I ask somebody who is an acquaintance of mine or a friend of mine for a favor, if they say no, I'm 100% okay with this. And actually creates a lot of psychological safety for them, which I'll get into in a little bit as well. So how to be grateful, right? When I meet a new person, I think about in all the billions of years of evolution, what are the chances that both of us are alive at the same time and meeting each other? The probability is so low that that in itself is miraculous. And sometimes in the middle of exchange, I just think about that. And that makes me feel like, wow, this is actually really interesting. So there must be a reason why I'm meeting this person. And I dig a little bit deeper into that. And I try to really focus on the positives versus the negatives. Some people have, maybe a not so great exchange with somebody that they think is a taker, et cetera. And instead of focusing on all the givers they have in their life, all the great things that are happening in their lives, they start focusing on the negative. And that turns into a negative mindset, which then leads to, your mindset is really how you see your world. Like the world, I think, is pretty much void and you just project onto what you want. So you may as well project something positive onto the world if that's what's going to be happening anyhow, because that's going to lead to much more positive interactions with people. I'm going to give a case study on how I became an advisor to Silicon Valley, the TV show, that really captures some of the fundamental topic areas that I talked about earlier. So I basically got an email one afternoon asking for the full spelling of my name so they could actually give me credit as an advisor to the show for season 6 at the end of the TV show, end of each episode. And I was pretty surprised because one, I had never asked to become an advisor, and two, I had never seen an episode of the show. And it took me a little while to realize that, a couple minutes to realize that 3 months ago, I had done a favor for one of the producers of Silicon Valley, the TV show. And this is why I was being asked to become an advisor. What had happened specifically 3 months ago was I had met a guy named Jonathan, who was a producer for the TV show, at a mutual friends gathering. And Jonathan and I connected because we both figured out that we had lived in Mumbai, India at the same time about, I think, 8 years ago. And not only did we live in Mumbai at the same time, our apartment buildings in Mumbai were back to back, which is such a coincidence because Mumbai, India is such a gigantic city. And so we had like a lot of fun talking about India, all of our crazy adventures there, etc. And then at some point, and this is what I meant, for example, by connecting with a person out of the world. At some point, the conversation got into, the question of, what do you do for work, etc. And turned out he was a producer for the show. And even though I don't watch the show, not because it's not a good show, but because I haven't seen any TV since I was 18, I um, I asked him some questions about, what the next season was going to be about, out of politeness. And he basically said, we're going to gear around AI, quantum computing, and storing data on DNA. And as it so happens, one of my portfolio founders was doing a company that is actually storing data on DNA. I happen to know one of the founders of D-Wave, which is the first quantum computing startup, and a college acquaintance of mine who I had not been in touch with in many years was working at Rigetti Computing, which is one of the very large quantum computing startups. And so I offered to make him introductions to all those people. And I knew it was going to be mutually beneficial because who wouldn't want to talk to somebody from Silicon Valley, the TV show, and potentially get their ideas on TV? So I offered to make those introductions, and he took me up on the offer, and I made all the intros the next day. And that's how I got invited to become an advisor to the show. And afterwards, I gave them a bunch of other tips on AI stuff as well. So what does this example show us, right? This example shows how I was able to use some of the fundamental ideas that I presented earlier about what conscious networking is in this situation. So I saw the person out the role. Jonathan and I are still friends. He's an awesome human being, and I would have helped him regardless. So I was just really grateful for the opportunity to make a new friend and be helpful. I created mutually beneficial relationships for everybody involved. And I got to reach out to a college acquaintance who I had not spoken to for many years. We basically like didn't know each other very well at all. But as I mentioned, you don't really need to constantly stay in touch. If one, you bring something that's really relevant to the other person, which in this case it was, and two, we had enough interactions where he knows who I am and had all good experiences. And so why wouldn't he want to help out in this case? Also because it was interesting for him as company to participate in this show. So it was all so this case study is just basically showing that you can apply a lot of these principles to your own life, and it typically leads to pretty good results. And that's a photo of me at the premiere with one of the actors. I also want to address how to handle asks to weak connections, because I think a lot of people are afraid to ask other people for favors or afraid to reach out because they're not spoken to the person maybe for a long time. And again, this goes back to what I said earlier, which is if you made a really good first set of impressions, um, you decrease the chances of having that fear coming, right? Because you are much more likely going to be welcomed back into that person's life. But say, you're just writing email and it's a little bit out of the blue. How do you handle that? Well, I just state that in the beginning. Sometimes I write an email saying, hey, like I realize this is really out of the blue, but like I noticed maybe you're connected to this person that I'm trying to get in touch with on LinkedIn. And I was wondering, like, would you know them well enough for me to send you an email to forward to them to see if they would like to connect with me for the below reasons? And I make it really easy for them to help me out, right? Like I handle all the logistics. I write out the email on a clean email, another email tab for them to send to the other person. And so that makes it easier for them. And they're grateful to me for making it easy for them because not everybody does that. And I also make it okay for them to say no. I end the emails typically with, either way, like, I hope you're really doing well. And, thanks for your time. And this creates psychological safety because if you are asking for a favor and you feel really entitled that the person should help you, a lot of people will feel resistance to that. And I myself have found people asking me for favors that are really not favors because they're more like demands. And in the vast majority of cases, unless you're a really close friend, I don't feel any obligation to help anyone in that regard, especially that's the attitude that you take. And so I think it's really important to come into these sort of relationships with respect and a clean intentionality. And that's, I think, how I've been able to leverage a lot of my weak connections because I'm really respectful of their time. I am concise about my asks. I make it easy for them to help me out. And I'm 100% okay if they don't have the time where they can't help me out. I also want to talk a little bit about how do you network these days through LinkedIn, where everything is very virtual. And I'm going to give 5 screenshots of good LinkedIn outreach requests that I've gotten in the last month because of that initial set of posts about conscious networking and the subsequent posts that I have written about various topic areas, and how people have been able to sort of find me through those and add me on LinkedIn, and why I said yes to these specific 5 requests. First of all, I think everybody should write a little note on LinkedIn if you're trying to reach out to somebody. To go through the first example, this is a screenshot of a note that I got from somebody, and she wrote, I read your post below through one of our mutual connections, and I could totally relate to it. Would like to add you to my network and be delighted to be in your LinkedIn circle / friends. We'll send you an invite shortly. First of all, this is a really polite and short note, which is really appreciated. And she also shares mutual connections with me, which is a really good signal to me because it means that she's part of a trusted network. And the fact that she could relate to my work makes me feel like that I can relate to her. And so why would I not say yes to something like this? The second note says, hi Fang, I just came across your profile and I like your self-introduction a lot. I hope to connect with you. I have over 10 years strategic BD experience helping Western tech companies expand into China. I'm moving to the US next month. I think we might run into each other at work one day. So I definitely said yes to this because one, she has relevant work experience and she's right. It's a pretty small circle. So we probably will run into each other. And not only that, she read my self-introduction, which not everybody does, and she referenced to it. And that means that she is somebody who pays a lot of attention and cares about getting to know me as a person. The third one is a bit long, so I'm just going to skim through this a little bit. But it says, wanted to let you know I really appreciate your recent posts on networking. While I don't work in tech, the post really elucidated some concepts that I've been slowly turning over for about a year. the post about changing your thoughts and the parable of Simon were particularly powerful. And then some book recommendations. Why I said yes is because this person is very honest and transparent. He is clear that he doesn't work in technology, but he really likes my posts. And not only that, he was able to reference which two of the multiple posts that I posted really resonated with him, which means that he was paying attention to a lot of my writing, not just some of it. And lastly, he gave me book recommendations. And I recommend people put a simple ask in their LinkedIn profile about that helps them filter whether or not someone has actually read your profile. And I asked for book recommendations, and the fact that he gave that to me shows that he was paying a lot of attention to what I care about. I think a key takeaway from a lot of these outreach is that you really have to tailor your message to the person who's receiving it. They have to feel that you really want to be talking to them, that you care about them as a person to some degree, or at least about what they care about, and that it's not just some sort of random generic cold outbound email. Another example is, as a very new and very weak connection, I love to open my network up to you and happy to make any helpful intros. Really liked your article, brutally honest, and a combination of business and personal, right? This is a very short message, but it's honest, it's personalized, and he's also offering to help, which shows me that he's also a giver. And that, of course, is somebody that I actually want to accept into my network. And the last one is somebody wrote, I saw your post and many things really resonate. I helped several friends form partnerships or acquire customers after I left my work for MBA. I found some principles you wrote about were simple but not understood by all. Would like to follow your work more closely. This is a person who has shown that she's also really good at being a connector of people, and that she also has spent a bunch of time thinking about similar topics to me, and that she's willing to engage in the long run by following my work more closely in the future. So of course, I'm going to say yes to something like that. I hope that this presentation was helpful to all of you. And if you want to connect with me, feel free to drop me a note on LinkedIn. That is my LinkedIn profile there. And I look forward to connecting with some of you, and I hope that we get to stay in touch.